Hello, everyone. We are almost live. I'm just waiting for a little progress bar to go, but just let us know a fun fact about yourself in the chat. Today, we learned about maple story, cosplaying, sharks, living in Canada. So we'd love y'all to keep sharing your fun facts as we introduce our event. So we're so excited to have Matt here again, doing another workshop on prototyping with Adobe XD. Matt was with us last Thursday about a workshop on introduction to Adobe XD. So feel free to watch that if you want. The recordings is on the Product Splash Discord channel if you want to catch up on anything as well. This event will be recorded, so anytime you can follow the recording or the live stream, which will be shared in Discord shortly. If you missed any part, you can catch up. So you'll be able to rewatch this anytime. Use closed captioning on that too. I know that was something that was requested. Unfortunately, we were not able to turn on closed captioning in our Zoom. I've tried it out for a long time. Unfortunately, it just didn't come on my Zoom plan, but you can get that in the YouTube channel. And yeah, I'm pretty sure y'all know me by now, but I'm Grace. And here's Jack, two admins for Design Buddies, and we're running Product Splash along with Product Buds. And for this event, we'll start with a workshop. Matt will be going over some prototyping in Adobe XD, and based on those things that you submitted on Slido that was shared on Discord earlier. So for the Slido, we'll be sharing it throughout the chat. So this is where you can request Matt to make something in Adobe XD, like a flow, and you'll be able to get your input on that too. So make sure to submit that Slido. It's really important to keep it there. So you can also upload each other's ideas and we can prioritize based on there if we run out of time. And then we'll have a group photo at the end and then Q&A. So it'll be the whole same exciting agenda as last time. And also if you enjoyed or learned anything today, feel free to post about Instagram stories, post about us on social media, tag Product Splash 2021, tag Design Buddies, tag Product Buds, tag Matt. We'd love to reshare and just see what y'all learned from it as well on our social media as well. Help you get more visibility as a thought leader in the design and tech space too than what we post about on social media. With that, we'll start with a group photo. With that, I'll hand the floor off to Matt.
Thanks, Grace. Yeah. And yeah, so on the Slido, if you are adding questions or things you want to see built, make sure you upvote the one that is already there. Don't add multiple because we will prioritize based on the upvotes. So if you really want to see something, make sure you upvote it. And let's get started. So last week, if you were here, we went through an introduction to Adobe XD. Today, we're going to start kind of from the prototyping section, just go over the basics again, as many of you are moving into prototyping your wireframes or low fidelity, high fidelity designs maybe, as you come into submission deadline. So I want to walk through. I'm going to go through this tutorial kind of half of the session, and then we'll flip over to Slido and see which ones we haven't covered and try and build them out live, just to show you some examples of how to use these prototyping features. So like I said, we're prototyping in XD. You guys should know what XD is by now, but as a reminder here, there's lots of great prototyping tutorials on adobe.com/learnxd. So feel free to visit that after the session or play back the recording on the intro session. And just like in the last session, this little preview window is going to be really handy today because as we're building out prototypes, we can leave this up if we want and just interact them in real time so we can make little adjustments, see it happening in the preview window, so we don't have to go back and forth and play things, but we'll get to that. So to kick things off, we talked a little bit about AutoAnimate last time, overlays, voice prototyping, scroll groups, and some other prototyping features. Just to get us started, make sure we're all on the same page, we're going to start with some basics and go through all the different options for prototyping. Again, if you have questions, drop them in the chat, and I'll try and pick them up as we go. So here we have two screens, two different artboards, and we have several different prototyping options. So when we toggle over to the prototype tab, I get this blue highlight on the selected artboard. And I can drag the little arrow over, and this basically allows me to create my destination. So when I click or do an action, a trigger on this artboard, it's going to take me over here in some form or fashion. And so by default, in the property inspector, our interactions are set to tap, which is a mouse click. And then by default, your action type is a transition. So these are our basic controls that you're used to in most prototyping, like even just stringing images together and in Vision. Those are your basic transitions. And when you're in transition, you can dissolve, you can do slides and pushes. Some of these are really handy for mobile app interactions, just sliding pages back and forth with a little bit more flair than just a dissolve. So let's walk through some of these right now. So in this case, I'm going to size this down a little bit. You're going to find out about this Mac. Cool. So here, if I tap, it's simply going to dissolve and change to the other slide. I can use my arrow keys in the preview window to actually move back and forth between slides. But here, if I switch this now to a slide left, I'm going to get a bit more motion. The right artboard is going to slide in left and push the other one out of the way, or slide over top, technically. If we did the same thing with a push, when I click, it's just going to slide, and both artboards are going to move across the plane rather than kind of overlapping and moving. Now, I can do this with all directions. I won't sit here and go through all of them in front of you. You can play with these yourself and see what the different effects are. But I also want to point out easing. So these are all different easing curves that are pre-canned. So as you go through and change these, you can create some different effects. So bounce is going to look like this. When it's fast, bounce is probably too fast and jarring. So you might need to slow down a bounce. And this is going to be too slow, but just to show you what's kind of happening. It's kind of loading and then bouncing. So probably very few use cases for this in a true interaction, but you might use this for like a loading indicator or something like a ball bouncing. Typically, you're going to be using your ease ins, outs, and then snap is actually pretty handy as well. So you can see it kind of like goes past and then it just subtly loads. So this is great for if notifications are popping into the screen. Yeah, little things, overlays even popping in. You can use that to create a bit more motion than just an ease. But again, play with these, play with your timings, and see what works for your situation. So these are all basic transitions, right? They're basically treating each artboard as a static screen. They're not doing anything with the elements inside. And as we talked about last time, we can switch over to AutoAnimate and kind of bring those to life. So here we have our 3 blobs on the first screen. I don't know if that's the proper term from the design system, but I'm calling them blobs. And so again, we have all these same easing curves. I'm going to use just a simple ease in out. We can bump this up to 0.8 seconds. Yeah, blobs, perfect. And I have everything named and grouped. So when I click on this, we can just move the blobs and they kind of rotate. And immediately you feel like there's this added sense of fidelity and it feels more real just from doing a simple little motion. It doesn't look like it's just moving an image back and forth. It's moving the image itself. And so if we jump into that, we can do a few other things here. You can see here in the layers panel, I have the blobs in a group. And because I have them in a group, I can do other things like move them off canvas. And you want to make sure that they're in a group and part of that group is in contact with the artboard. Because if you move individual elements off, like I do up here, it's actually going to become disconnected from the artboard, which is kind of the action you want. But when you're prototyping, you can put them in a group to change that. So here, maybe I'll back all of these off. And now when we play this, the blobs will move and they'll slide in. So this is a handy way to kind of build elements in and out of the artboard. Now, if we take that a step further, and I can show you how you can use AutoAnimate to actually kind of change the speed of elements. There isn't a timeline currently. Actually, this one's going to have to stay there. But in this case, over here on the right, we can change the starting position of these blobs. And with AutoAnimate, everything's linear. So it's kind of moving on the same timeline. But depending on the start and end position, you can change how long it takes an element to get there. So in this case, why don't we start like this? We'll rotate it, maybe just add some more cool stuff. And let's see what happens here. So in this case, they're also going to different destinations. That's weird. Maybe I made them too ridiculous. Let's see. Oh, you know what? Somehow I actually lost. This is what happens if you don't have them on the artboard. So we'll start that one there just for now. Okay, we're going to back this up. We're not going to do a race today because I broke something. But in theory, you can move these elements off canvas in the group, and then depending on their distance from the artboard or the location they're moving to, then they should be able to prototype. And so in that case, we get our motion back. Yeah, so that's AutoAnimate. That's how you can move elements on and off. I recommend AutoAnimate probably at a later stage in your process. You might not need it when you're wireframing, when you're building out a flow. You might want to stick to those basic transitions just to not get hung up on the little details of AutoAnimate. As you can see, it can be finicky as you get going and get more advanced because you're trying to make really intricate things. For the most part, it's pretty straightforward and it just does what you want. Another thing you can do, and this might be helpful when you're animating icons, for instance, or animating shapes, you can also edit or animate vector paths. So with AutoAnimate, I just drew this with the pen tool, recreated a blob, and we can come in and actually change that blob around on the second screen. And it's not going to look great, but it's okay. We're doing it on the fly. So now we have two different versions of this, and they're both named the same thing up here in the layers panel. And so if we enable a prototype link, and in this case, we can actually set something on the blob itself, drag that over, and we could even loop it back. Now we have an AutoAnimate with ease in and out. And when we play this, the blob will morph and create a cool thing. So use case wise, this might not have anything to do with anything, but if you picture doing this with icons, you can design things and make like a bell jiggle, change the shape of an icon if you want. There's a lot of opportunity with AutoAnimate and using this. So we walk through doing the tap trigger, and we have a tap trigger here. You'll notice in the trigger option, and this is a handy thing to pay attention to, when I have a single element like this selected, I'm only going to see tap, drag, keys and gamepad, and voice. But there is one more that's available when I have an artboard selected. So in this case, I've selected the entire artboard. If I drag this over, I'll see this new one called time. And time is really handy for creating delays. So I've had some questions this week on how do I make something appear on the same screen? And you're likely going to do that with a time trigger and have 2 or 3 states of an artboard with a time trigger. And that's going to automatically progress your prototype to make things like notifications pop in. And so if we set that up, we can set up a delay. So maybe after 0.8 seconds, then it's going to initiate that action. And we can also loop that back. So if I do that, maybe in this case, we'll go 0.4 seconds. So now when I play that after 0.8, it's just going to do its own thing and it's going to morph back and forth. So I've now created an animation loop, which is pretty cool. And this can be helpful. These time triggers can be helpful when doing things like loading indicators as you're moving between screens. Maybe you rotate the object and it rotates across the different states. There's a lot that you can do with time triggers. So it's a splat, yes. Any questions on the basics of prototyping before we dive into use cases? And if not, everyone's following along. How did you make it a loop again? Great question. So from here, and I'll delete these other tap triggers just so they don't confuse anybody. What I did was I took the first artboard right here. Zoom in. I took this artboard, dragged I don't even know what this is called, my connector, my prototype wire, my wire.
Noodle.
Over here.
Noodle.
A noodle?
Yeah.
Okay, it's the noodle. I've never had to say a name for those. I just do it. But good to know. I'll call it a noodle from now on. So I drag that sounds so weird. I'll drag my noodle over here and set up the time delay. And then I can drag one from this screen back to the first one. So after 0.4 seconds, it goes back to the first, and then it just perpetually loops. You can do this with artboards. You could also loop it to another version of this. So if I copied this over, I could instead take that loop, drag it over here. And this can be handy if you're trying to reset something. So it's coming back to that original state, but then you want an action or you want it to pause. This is how you would do that. You'd break that loop doing this. So in this case, if I was to play that, it's going to morph back, but then pause. So that's how you would achieve that and break a loop. So hopefully that answers your question, Jennifer. I think I saw someone call it noodles okay. Any others? And then we'll dive in, and this is probably where you'll get a lot more questions. So to start, we're just going to start by stringing together a basic navigation menu. This is probably something all of you are going to do. And if you want to play around with it, this is just one of the UI kits from Adobe XD. So when you go File, Get UI Kits, it's one of the first ones listed at this link. And if we zoom in, we have a navigation bar that is a component. You can see there's a bunch of interactions already set up here. So we'll see how these impact things. But if we play this, we have some hover states built in here. And yeah, some really weird hover states. So I might pop in here and just break this from the component. So we now have a group. And this is just going to allow me to get in here and do what we need to do. So what we have is we have our news page. We have department services, job tools, all of our pages are here. So how I would go about setting this up. Oh, there, that's why. There's two components for some reason. What I can do in prototype mode is I can select any element on the page to be a trigger or a trigger target for my link. So here, as I click in, now I get the nav bar. I can double click again and get news. And so here I can simply drag this over. As I come to the edge, XD is going to scroll for me, so I don't have to worry about zooming out or anything. But then I can also set destinations simply by clicking on that and then coming over to my destination panel here. If you have a lot of artboards, that's going to become pretty hard to find unless you're really good at naming. You can see I don't name my artboards well. So I like to just zoom out, drag over. And what's going to happen is on the right, it's going to remember those settings I was using above. So I actually want to start with transitions here. And I'm just going to use a dissolve. So now that I've set that up, any of my other links here, If I can tap in here, job tools. And when you hold Command or Control on your keyboard, ooh, nope. You'd think I've done this before. If you hold Command, you can click into things and find the nested elements if you are struggling to click on them, or use your layer panel. I find the layer panels are a really great way to select elements when they're in a big, heavy group. So I think that's where I was going, who we are. So now I've got these built out. Let's just, oh, that was supposed to go to contact us. Cool. Pay attention, Matt. All right, so now when we play this, they're all set up to transition. So I can click on news and the page is going to dissolve in. And now I have this component again. But you'll see now I don't have any of these links available. So what in theory I would really do is, as I built that as a component, because these are all going to the same locations, I would make those on the main component of that menu. And so I'm just going to create this as a component. So now it's all reusable. And I'm going to copy that to my clipboard and just come and delete these old linked ones. Again, I pulled these in from a UI kit, so there's some different things happening, and it broke from its original library. So what I can do, I don't have to go artboard by artboard to paste these. I can select all the artboards, hit paste, and they'll all populate exactly where they need to be in place. So now as I navigate, if I click on news, I can then click on department services, job tools, and now I can move through this navigation like it's an actual website, and then scroll along. Now, if I'm on this artboard, I probably want the nav to stay sticky. I might not, I might, it's up to you. But if you want to make it sticky, you're going to want to group these elements, and maybe the breadcrumbs aren't going to be sticky. So in this case, I want that menu, I'm going to call it menu item. I want that to stay on top, and then everything below it, down here is going to scroll underneath. So this is your layer order, right? So anything on top here is above everything else. Now, we also covered that when you expand an artboard, you get this dotted blue line, which is the viewport. So the bottom of the viewport. So when I play this, that dotted blue line is the bottom of this window. And anything below it is going to scroll into view. So to make this header sticky, with it selected, we can come over here in design mode and enable fixed position while scrolling. It's also available in prototyping mode down here. And now when we play that, all the content is going to scroll underneath. So we can add styling, like add shadows if we want, but I'm just going to leave it like that. And then we can also go in and apply this. If we select all of these, we can make them all fixed position. They should all be at the top because they're the last thing pasted. And so that behavior is going to exist now, even if we go to department services, scroll up, and then that menu is always available. And job tools will take us back, scroll it up to the top. So that's a really nice way of building in a navigation. And then if you build in components on these, that's where we can create hover states. So you saw that initially on the component in there. We could also, in theory, create multiple hover states on this menu component and style that specifically for when each one's hovered. That one can become a bit more complex, but it's up to you. I recommend setting up individual menu icons, and then doing overrides. But for this instance, I'm going to just create a new state here. If you're doing a component with multiple hover states, you don't want to use the base, the pre-populated hover state, because you only get one of these from the default state. Actually, yeah, you don't want to do this. It's an example of what not to do. The reason why you want to set up individual components in here is because they're each their own hover target. So then you can set up a hover state, it's going to expand, and then as you move to each one, it's going to do its hover. But that's an added thing. You don't necessarily need that, especially on mobile. You're not going to be building in hover states, of course, because you can't really hover. You could use the hover to represent long presses if you wanted to. Okay, no other questions, but let's hop on to another one. I'm going to kind of fly through some of these, so feel free to jot down questions, but just for the sake of time. This is going to be another example. Ignore the pink dotted line. That's just reminding myself which use case we're going to focus on here. But what you can see here is we have this carousel, and something that you might want to prototype if this is key to your design is the interactions for this. Now, one way you could do it is copy and paste the artboard 3 times, change the image, and then use AutoAnimate between the artboards if you wanted to. And so to do that, you could simply paste this here, paste, and then you have 3 versions. And then you can pull in your images. So maybe you have a new image here and a new image here. And then you would go in and adjust this. Now, again, you can copy and paste appearance. So I could copy this element, paste the appearance, and fill it. It's not the one I wanted to do. Paste the appearance. And I can create some pretty basic interactions. So here in prototype mode, I would then double click on this chevron, say this wants to go over here. And in this case, I could use a transition or an AutoAnimate depending on the look I'm trying to achieve. Let's go AutoAnimate and see what happens. And then I can select this icon and go back to here. So now I have that nice scrolling page, but I can also build in these scrolls. And you notice using AutoAnimate, it actually holds its scroll position and doesn't reload back to the top. So now as I'm navigating between, I'm actually staying static in this carousel, no matter where I am. And the little indicator is changing as well. So that's a handy little way to do the carousel. But if you're going to use this element in a lot of designs, you might want to actually keep this as a component. So if we come back to our source here, I'm just going to select this carousel, right click, make it a component. And this is where we can use states to actually move between each of these. So I'm going to create a new state, call this slide 2. I'm just going to keep slide 1 as the default state, and then slide 3. So slide 2, we can come in and we can do different things. So if we're auto animating between them, we could even change this up. So this is just a fill, and let's go to the default state here. So this is kind of the main state. If we make changes here to the structure, then that'll pass down. And what we have here is we have the active, we have inactive and inactive. I'm actually going to create another inactive slide or chevron, and I'm going to move my active up top. And so what I've done is this is going to be inactive 1. And naming can help you really guide things and make sense of things. So in this case, we're going to use AutoAnimate, and we're actually just going to move this active slider between the circles. There's other really advanced things you could do if you wanted to mask and like have the color fill in behind it. But for the purposes of today, we'll keep it like this. So now that I've set that up in my default state, that same thing applies in slide 2 and 3. So in slide 2, I want my active state to move over here, just like that. And I can change my text. So in this case, let's say design buddies and product, buds launch, product splash 2021. I could have pre-written these, but we're going to make them up on the fly. And so here we can go back and forth. If we click back to default state, we might want to even turn down this one because it's kind of inactive. So we could use opacity there, bring it to 15% maybe. So now we have slide 1, slide 2. Let's throw in an image for slide 2. And if you wanted to add motion, you could add these elements outside, turn down the opacity, and then slide them in and switch them. If we have time, I can show an example of that. And then slide 3, again, we want to move this over. And those alignment tools really helping us out there. And in this time, this one will say prototyping wires found to actually be called noodles. And then I wonder if I have noodles, a picture of noodles. I'm not gonna go sushi. It's not noodles, but whatever. So now we have slide 1, 2, and 3. And what we can do in prototype mode is we can click into that component. And just like we did before, we can set up links, but this time we can just click on it and then we can choose our state. So we're not going to a new artboard, we're going to a different state. We have slide 2, we can't go back here. So slide 2, I'll come to that. And we just need to bring up the opacity here because I turned it down in the default state. So we'll crank that back up. And in this scenario, the back arrow is actually going to go back to our default state. This one's going to go to slide 3. And then slide 3, we can come in and we can bring this opacity up as well. And there are hotkeys to move between these tabs. So if you find going back to click on them is painful, you can just use like option 2, 1, 2, and 3. I'm just trying to do it visually so that you see it happening. Great, and where did I leave off? All right, so we have that. And in this case, of course, this one's gonna go back to slide 2. And this one will not be working. All right, so now we're set up. Whatever state you have, this is a little pro tip, whatever state you have selected here is the one that's gonna display when you hit play. So if you're hitting play and you're like, why is my error state on? It's because it's selected here. And there's a reason for that, because you might wanna use states just as display states. They're not always gonna start from the default state. So just take a look at that. But now we have a single artboard, we can scroll, we can go back to news. This one is news. So on department services, we can click back to news and we have our components. So now I can just click between these. The image and headlines are going to change and the little arrow thing indicator is going to change. The best part, because it's a component, let's say I decide to wipe out this section and add another element here. Just like that, I can drop it in. And they're going to work the same in both situations, just like that. So the power of components. Okay. No questions, just comments. Awesome. Time. Cool. Next, we're going to jump into overlays. So I see there is a question here on overlays or pop-up menus, which is perfect because that was a plan. So here we have an event artboard. Again, I could fix elements if I wanted to. I have all of this description. And then down here, I have an add to calendar button. I'm actually going to mix things up. And first, we can make this a floating add to calendar button. So it's not all the way down at the bottom. So once again, this is a required field. We're going to just change this to add to calendar. And maybe we will make this floating. So I'm going to first mark it as fixed position when scrolling, but it's below the viewport. So first off, we actually need to bring it up. And what we can do is we'll just tap in, maybe square out the corners. And then I'm going to set it basically right on the bottom line. And clearly no padding or stacks are set up on this button. So that would be nicer if it was. Maybe we'll set that up right now. And then on the background, I'm just going to add a drop shadow that goes up. So it kind of creates this sense of depth. That's a pretty strong back border, but just something to indicate depth. And probably we want to swap this like this. I'm just using eye to pull up the eyedropper for fill. So when you have an object selected, you can just grab that. So now when I play this, that calendar button is going to float on top, and I can always click this. I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger. So what we want to happen is when I click on that, I want to be able to select the calendar service that I want to use. And this is probably going to be an action that's available from multiple artboards. So I don't want to recreate it every time, but I want to reference it in the flow. And so I can use overlays to do that. I design it once, I reference it as a modal or an overlay. And so if I go to prototype mode with this button selected, I can click and drag and go to that artboard, and it's going to, again, default to my last option. I don't want to auto animate because what's going to happen here is it's changing the entire artboard size and there's no background. So it's just going to show me a modal on a black screen, which is not what I want. I actually want the next option called overlay. And then I'm going to get this little indicator. I can position it where I want in that viewport. Again, you can't. You can't even slide it out of the viewport. And that is not going to be fixed. So if you scroll the screen, the overlay is still there. And then I can choose those motions. So in this case, maybe I want to slide up from the bottom or slide down from the top. So in this case, let's see how this looks. I can scroll and be anywhere on the page. And if I click add to calendar, that little modal is going to slide up. So in this case, we probably can just do with a dissolve. That might look the nicest. It shows up. And then I can include other actions. I can include a closeout and back off. So you can do this with a lot of different modals, pop-ups, keyboards, menus, things like that. So this would also work great here as a menu. It looks like I deleted the menu that was there, so it's not showing up, but that could just appear as an overlay here. Oh, it is there. Somebody looked up the layers. Actually, it's because this is at the bottom. So in this case, the way this was designed in the UI kit, this is actually an AutoAnimate between states. So this is another way to do it. And then doing it this way, you have a bit more control over that background content because they've added a background blur here, blurred it out, and then you can set all your links here. So that's another way to do it. But if you're using a consistent thing, you might want to use an overlay, or you create another artboard and auto-animate it in to get really special effects. Okay. Next, we'll talk quickly about stacks. So in this design, we have a few long lists. Perhaps this isn't the best way to display things. So here I have a stack, and a stack, if you remember, is a great way to quickly adjust sizing and spacing, easily rearrange elements like this. We can also do it on the entire page. So I'm just going to set that up between these two real quick, group it and stack it. So basically now, as I copy and paste elements here, the rest of the content's going to move down. But we can also do another fun thing with stacks, and say we decide we don't like this 3-card stack. Maybe we want that to be a horizontal gallery. We can do that in a couple clicks. So over here on stack, it defaults to vertical because that's how the content was laid out. But if I tap on this, you can see it automatically goes horizontal. and pulls the rest of the content up because it was all in a stack, which is great, but now I only see one card. So now if I click into this group, I can come over to the right and turn on something called the scroll group. And once I do that, then I can set, again, that viewport frame. So I want them to be able to scroll all the way through that. And so now when I play, I can scroll through the screen, but I can also hold shift and scroll through those various options. So it gives me a different interaction. I can try out a different layout. And this is technically done not in prototyping mode, but it helps. Now, what you'll see here is the end of that scroll group kind of comes right up to the edge of the screen and doesn't look great. So what we can do, actually, I'm going to keep that preview window open for you. What we can do with that scroll group selected, actually the group above within it, let's open this up. Let's select that group. So I can see that that's the group. You can see down here, padding's enabled. Padding is turned on automatically when you turn on a stack, and it sets it to 0 in this case. If I click on this button and tab over, you can see right here, this is going to change my right padding value. And if I bump it up to 20, I can actually scroll and then end it so it's nicely aligned to the rest of my content. And so I knew that by using this guide and knowing I measured things out to 20. So just like that, I have a nice multi-dimensional interactional prototype. Any questions on overlays or scroll groups? Again, we're just kind of bouncing off the surface here. Jack loves stacks. Grace does too. Anybody else love stacks? Give me a big hands up for stacks in the chat. Finally, we love stacks. All right, love the energy. We're gonna do a little notification, and the same approach can be used in different ways. I'm just gonna do this one as an alert bar. Yeah, and probably how you wanna use this is using that time trigger. So let's say you land on a page. Perhaps we're gonna link to this from here. Bear with me, I'm just gonna go like from account. This is not accurate, but just to get us into a flow, we're gonna use that same transition state. So now when I click on account, maybe this takes me to an account page or something. But what's gonna happen is I'm gonna land on that page and then we want a notification to appear. So in this case, it's an alert bar. This could be a little indicator on a bell. This could be a fill on a bell, a little toast in the top corner. However you want to style it, the same principle applies. So in this case, I've designed the end state. I have a planned outage coming. This is all set up as a component, and I can actually right click and I'm going to reveal this in my assets panel. It's right here. And I'm just going to make this local. So it's still a component, but it's just living in my document now. These are all just because I've copied them from another library I had. So they're disconnected components now. It's on another computer. So I'm just going to copy this because I want this to be on the original screen so that I can animate it in. And again, I can paste that. It's going to appear in the same space. And the key thing I want to check is that the naming is the same across both, and it is. And I probably want to make sure the stacking order is the same. So here I have, again, a couple odd components that are appearing. Oops. So I'm just going to clear those out quick. So here I have that nav bar, the nav bar, alert bar. In this case, I want that alert bar underneath the navigation. I'm going to call this navigation just so that this is all named appropriately. So those are the same, the nav bar and the alert bar. So the idea is that the alert bar slides out underneath the navigation bar. And so to do that in this first state, we can simply move it up wherever we want it. And then I like to turn down the opacity just so that when things move in, they're kind of going from 0 to 100 real quick. Sorry, it's getting late. And so now we've come into this page. We want to be able to get to this page. And obviously we don't want the user to click to pull open an error state. So we're going to go from this page over here. I've already done it like magic. And we can either do a transition, which is just going to dissolve it, or we can do an AutoAnimate. And in this case, let's try out a snap just to see how it feels. So again, we're going to click on the account page here. And then our notification is going to slide in after the set delay. Now, what we can do is we can jump in here and see where this is linked. So this is already set to something. This is set to a closed destination. So I've pulled it from another kit that was already wired. So I'm actually just going to delete that. And in this case, we could go back here, but we already have a time delay. So we don't actually want that to happen. So we might just want another copy of this again, so we don't get stuck in a loop. And we're going to want to delete that time trigger. And then once we select that, we can go here, AutoAnimate, and snap it out. So we'll play this, go to the account, notification slides down. I can still scroll through this page, and depending on how I fix those elements, I can have that alert fix as well. And then I can close it out and it'll disappear and I'm back into my flow. So that is the examples I have, and that took a bit more time than I thought. So why don't we turn over to the Slido and see what other ones we have. So see a lot for onboarding flow. It's a big one. I'd like to see a prototype notification. Perfect. Pop-up. Perfect. Could you prototype an interactive map? Yeah. So that one's smaller. Onboarding flow is pretty big. So I'll talk a bit more generally about it maybe. Actually, I have an onboarding flow, a semi onboarding flow right here. So if we're talking mobile app and like first app load, there's a whole lot of different theory and decisions and product management decisions that you need to make for your onboarding flow. Like, are people paying? How much information are you collecting? Do they just load the data right away without having to create an account? Is there Face ID? There's a whole lot that can go into it. But from prototyping perspective, a lot of it's probably going to be tap and time triggers. So in this case, I'll just play this for you. I have a tap to start just because this is a demo, but this should probably be a time trigger. So let's just change that. I'm going to change that to time and give it maybe a 1 second delay. And you can picture this as that load up of the screen. And so the app loads and I'm on a login page. So in this case, you can either log in or create an account. You can only access things if you have an account. So when I create an account, again, I'm using AutoAnimate between all of these. So it's not just dissolving, the image mask is collapsing, the logo is moving. And then I'm using component states here. And I could set up multiple states so that there's like an active state. When I tap it again, it fills in the content. And then I can move to email simply by tapping on that. And what I would do here is I would actually set up one component for the input fields so that as I click on each state, I'm changing the whole state of that component. Or you can keep it really simple and set these up as individual artboards. So when I go through component states, just know that's kind of the more advanced level to save you time. You can always do these artboard by artboard and just making those changes. So don't fear if you're really confused about components. And then when you hit get started, I go into this little loading flow just to simulate that the app is getting ready to load your stuff. And then there's this placeholder home screen. So all of that is using AutoAnimate. I have elements, all these elements moving between their states or between the slides. And then with this loading indicator, I've basically changed the rotation of it. So in one, it's 0, of course. and it's 0 on the other. That shows up. That's kind of weird. What I did was I dragged it around and it actually went all the way back to 0 and it's animating around. So that can be a little finicky. I recommend going to just like 359 degrees, not a full circle, just to make sure that it goes around and doesn't go around the other way. But yeah, that's like the basis of an onboarding flow. And then you might have this set up as its own flow and then go into an app, another journey. But if there's any like specific questions on onboarding flows, I can cover that. It's a pretty broad workflow with a lot of variables. So feel free to drop those in the chat. I'll talk a little bit about the interactive map right now because I love doing that, and that's scroll groups. And I happen to have a map. Perfect. So to create an interactive map, we'd be using scroll groups. And so we could pretend this is a contact page maybe. So here I have a map of Raleigh, North Carolina. Again, we're going to want to build out some states. So let's create some really simple ones. We can kind of emulate the map icons here. And these are going to be really ugly because we don't have a lot of time. We'll just do that with like a nice border or something. Should make this blue. Okay, so we'll treat this as our little map marker. So I can convert this into a component right away. I'll call this my map marker. And I might want a hover state if I'm on the map. And I might want a pop-up state. So first, for the hover state, maybe we make the border darker. We'll make the border darker. We're making this up on the fly here. So now we have default and hover, and then maybe in the pop-up state, we need a little modal. So I'll go back to the default state, click in, and then I can draw and position things where I need them to be. So I like setting things up in the default state because I don't have to repeat myself in the others. I know naming is going to be consistent, and then I can just hide it in the default state. So here we'll make this, we'll add a drop shadow, and then we can add text. So this is my popover. We'll make that big. So now I have my default hover and pop-up will stay the same. I'm just going to group this and then call this popover. And I can do a few things. I can completely hide it. I like to also drop the opacity before I hide it because when it animates to the other states, it's going to turn on and just be like, boom. So if you dim down the opacity, that will actually gradually kind of move in. So now I just have that component, hover states like that. And then maybe I have a click state. And so here I can bring that popover back. Like this, and then I want to select the opacity and bring that back up. So now we have our three states. Default will already be set up. Let's put this in a giant artboard and play it. So now I have, you probably can't see that, a little hover. I'll collapse the artboard down a bit. So next we need to prototype the next link. So the hover came pre-canned from the default state, but from the hover state, we can add in an interaction here by clicking this plus. We'll use a tap and it'll go to the pop-up state. We can do the same thing on default. I like to have one on both just because you never know when the click is going to register. So I'm going to hit plus, add a tap. Make sure you don't just change the hover state. You want to actually create a new one. So then we have pop-up. So I'm going to also add one from popover just so that if I click on this, it's going to take me to the default state and close the popover. However you want to do that, you can do that. So now if I play this, I have a little hover, but I click on it and I get a popover. It's great. And then I can close it. So now I have this component and I can use that throughout my map. So what I would do is I would start with my map here. And I'm just going to drag these off the artboard so we can work with them. And blue is probably the worst color I could have picked for this map, but I can just copy and paste these, place them around. And then as overrides go, I would override them. Maybe I have states for different map icons, things like that. But now I have 4 of these. So I'm going to just take this, make this a group, and I can call this my map element. Now, of course, if I go and try and say jam this into this view here, that's not going to work because it's so big. So I'll bring this up and I will use the 3rd scroll group option, horizontal and vertical scroll. This is going to give me all 4 corners. If I hold option, I can kind of crop it down symmetrically. Now I have an element that I could start to position in the screen. And perhaps, I mean, that section's too small. So we're just going to make this a big section. So now I have a cropped down map view. And as I scroll down to it, you can see now I'm in this view and all of those component states will still work. I can bring open multiple if I want, and I can find them. Even if they're off the view, they're still there. So that's how you'd make an interactive map. Pretty straightforward. And of course, you can zoom this in however you want. Because this is a group under here, if I resize this, I can kind of change that zoom level and then keep cropping this down. So let's go make it fit right in there. Make it look more like an embedded map. And just like that. You will need to adjust some of the state sizing just because I resized it all. So you could turn off responsive resize if it's giving you some weird things like that, or change to manual. But yeah, just like that, you have a nice embedded map. And so that is all the use cases that are covered in Slido. Is there any new questions, things that you want to see from what you've seen? Was this helpful? Is there something you're stuck on in your prototyping flow? I'll turn it over to questions now, if there are any.
Yeah, feel free to submit any questions on Slido, but that was cool. I loved how y'all took on the name of Noodle. That was literally something so random that I feel like it came from another workshop I was in. So it's a Noodle, everyone.
Here we go. Prototyping wires.
Mm-hmm.
I need more food pictures, but I started going away from food because I used them in a demo after not eating lunch and then just have a rumbling tummy. So
Oh no.
try and avoid the food pictures. Yeah. It's not a real problem.
If y'all want, feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions, or raise your hand and I can unmute if you prefer asking like via voice. Oh, another question.
Oh.
From Anonymous on Slido is, how do you attach a pop over to a post featuring a business info that will hover over?
So I assume that's talking about the map. So in the same way, whoever asked that, do you want to clarify? Or do you want to remain anonymous?
I made it y'all able to unmute yourself, so feel free to if you want. If you don't, you can remain silent.
I assume you're trying to.
Okay. Oh, hi. Yeah, sorry, I couldn't unmute for a second. So I'm speaking on like, so like if there's businesses like ratings like 1, 2, 3, I was thinking like it would be on the map showing like a vertical or a horizontal scroll, but have it attached to the popover. Like the popover would have one instead of popover. So I was wondering, like, how could you, like, as you're sliding over it and like clicking maybe on one of them, it would go to the next popover, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And rather than burn time creating a new demo, let me just open another one. So basically you're going to need to back off. You're going to want to make some components. And this is actually a cool thing that we can do. So here we have a scroll group, with a map in it of all these different countries. And what you can do with states and components is you can change the position of the scroll group when you switch states. So here we have the default state, which is the Canada state. I'm biased. But then we have a Brazil state. So all we did was change the position of the scroll group here. But when we go into prototype mode, you can see down here, we have a tap on Brazil. On the map, if you can navigate. So if you're like scrolling around, you can click on the marker and then it's going to switch to the state. But then also in this list view, we have a tap to the Brazil state as well. And vice versa, on Canada, we have a link back. And so you could set these up for every single item in the list, much like a map search results, which is, I think, what you're saying. And so that just simply looks like this. When I click on Brazil, the map is actually going to scroll to it. When I click on Canada, it scrolls back. So that is how you would do it. You might have your list off on the left, but basically all of those are included in a single component as states.
Yay, thank you. That was exactly what I was looking for.
Perfect. No problem. Good, because I didn't want to design the whole thing. Oops. All right, any other questions? I like doing these things on the fly, so give me a little challenge.
Yeah, spice things up.
Stump me. Make my noodle work.
Yeah.
If not, that's fine. Jack or Grace, anything you want to see? No, I shouldn't have asked Grace. Throw a curveball.
Yeah. Anything for our Fufflebloods? Oh, yeah, go ahead, Nathan. Feel free to type or unmute yourself if you want. I made it able for anyone to unmute.
Hey, Matt. This is Nathan from yesterday. So I'm trying to animate like a progress bar for a questionnaire. Would that be the same thing as the map, where it would be a component with several states, and then when I hit next, the progress bar would animate to more full?
Yeah, so that's another one where you can do it a couple different ways. I'm assuming you have kind of like a progress bar on the page and then questions below it with the next button, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So the simplest way would probably be to actually just have multiple artboards. If you want to make it a component and reusable, then yeah, you'd probably build those as states. But I would even just say, like, it's gonna be so ugly. You can just do it like this. So you'd build it up slowly as you go. And then you'd have your next button down here. And then there might not be a next or something. But then you'd essentially auto-animate between each of these. So tap auto-animate. And then when you hit next, the progress bar kind of grows with each new set of questions. And then you could essentially build in your questions They could kind of be on a carousel. Wow, that's not the right scale. Responsive resize. So if you did something like this, where you have like your questions, you could go like this. You could adjust those over. So then your flow, as you're progressing, it loads the progress bar and the next set of questions comes up. Is that kind of what you're looking at?
Yep, thanks.
Perfect. And so, yeah, just like other things, you could put this all into a single component and build those all as individual states. But in this case, because it's full page layouts, you might not have to. I wouldn't really worry about it. People might build that in if it's part of a design system and they want people to reuse the same elements. Are you able to add videos, a post that you can press play? Not yet. Or yeah, no, currently. But on an unrelated note, stay tuned for future updates from Adobe XD. I cannot tell you anything more than that. You can use images currently.
Maybe you could demonstrate, kind of going off that video idea, that reminded me of how popular just live chats are becoming. So maybe you could simulate that with a particular flow here. Maybe that'll trip you up a little bit. I'm thinking using some kind of time interactions.
Yeah. So 1 second. I might have some secret stuff I can't show. Where did I do that? You read my mind because I have. There we go. So that's a great question. This one is part of a demo for a floating chat. There's a tutorial file that looks just like this. I think it's on the Learn Hub already, I believe. So feel free to check that out if you want more details. But here again, we're using that kind of floating action button. It has a nice hover. I can open it up and then I get this support chat. This one's kind of interactive, but we can take this up a notch. So let me just not ruin this tutorial file and open in a new window. So what we can do, I've basically built this as a component as well. So there's the hover state, expanded state. This is actually using a nested component right here. So for the modal frame, and this itself has a few different states. So there's a few things you could do. You could, from this state where there's a guest typing and then a message sent, you could create a new one and say like response from agent. And what I've done is in here, this is a scroll group. And within that is a stack with some different states. So I could copy and paste this message, rearrange it, and then change the message. But because it's a scroll group and these are states, remember we can change that positioning. So perhaps I want this whole segment to then slide up. And Alex replies, so it's like, great, we can help you with that. Now, if this is coming from the message sent component, I probably also want that message to be included. So I'll just do the same thing, paste that, drop it, and then say, great, we can help you with that. And then in this case, I'm just going to take that maybe and turn down the opacity just to get a little bit more motion. I like having it on the previous artboard or state just for the motion. And then from here, crap. There's no time between states yet. So that throws a flaw in my plan. But if you were to map this out with artboards, you could do that. I'm just gonna cheat it slightly here and say this is gonna go over to the response from agent. And this time we're gonna use AutoAnimate. And I'll set this back to the default state. So again, we have that full workflow. The guest is now typing. And you could probably use a time trigger here if you were doing multiple artboards to animate the dots if you wanted to simulate the typing. Again, this is a pretty crude example. So then there's the guest. I scroll down and it's invisible. I probably should have hidden that so that there wasn't a scroll. And then you can use a time trigger and then the guest could, or the agent could respond. But because that's in a scroll group, it kind of pushed it up. But yeah, if you spilled this out over artboards for now, then you could create the time triggers.
That's super cool. I feel like that's a really great example of just, it may feel like you're working within a lot of constraints when you're trying to create a particular flow or interaction, but there are certain ways to hack it and figure it out that just with components and all the, especially AutoAnimate, all these different interactions, it's really, it's limitless. So really cool to see that.
And there's future changes coming on a undisclosed timeline that just keep making it better. So now that I did all that in the component and it was previously nested in this one, all of those functions I just built in should work just fine, just like that in the main component. So everywhere that component was, that new state is already added with the interactions, which is just makes it easy. So that's why I like recommending, you can see here, I've kind of built out the chat element, nested that within this frame so that I could apply a scroll area to it and kind of slowly built up from the core content. So that's a handy thing to think about doing as well.
Awesome. Definitely so much you can do with AutoAnimate. It's like pretty amazing because you don't really have to like put any frames. You have to like do one or the other and then like automatically calculate the frames in between, which is super cool. I use that a lot at work. Yeah, any other questions from our buddies? I know it's getting like pretty late for you, Matt, so want to be mindful of your time here. Let me check the Slido.
And if you dive into these things and you get stuck somewhere, I should have more mentorship hours coming up. So feel free to book me there. Or send me a message on Discord if you are stuck on XD things, and I'll try and reply as quick as I can. But look on the Learn Hub as well. There's a good chance I've done a tutorial on that already in most cases. So I can just point you to that. It's my favorite feature so far. AutoAnimate was like one of my first favorite features. Actually, that's a lie. Repeat Grid. Repeat Grid was launched like in the intro presentation at Max 6 years ago or something. AutoAnimate's really handy. That's what ended up getting me hooked on XD, just doing those little micro interactions. But I think it's a toss up between component states and stacks for me. Probably component states, because I can make do without stacks. It would stink, but having the reusability of components and states, that makes life so much easier.
Yeah, so it's so mixing. Mixing's like super scalable.
Yeah, especially when you're working with the design system and other designers. You don't have to recreate things. I hate redoing things.
Me too. I can relate to that.
Yeah, there's just no time.
Yeah, I know, right? Cool. Any other questions for our Fulful Bloods? Other than that, I hope Matt has a good night. I know it's like pretty late, like 9 p.m. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, when you share your prototype through a link and the Adobe XD subscription is finished, does that link still work? Good question. I don't know. I'd have to try that. In theory, it should, because it lives up on the web, on the Creative Cloud. But I can try and find out the answer to that. And what's the best way to save your work after when it is finished? Well, if you're in a cloud document, it auto saves. So it's automatically in the cloud. You could also go, if you want to just store like a local version, you can go into file and save it as a local document. And then you can just keep that XD file with you. So if you're trying to save it long-term, if you think you're not going to have Creative Cloud for a bit, but you want to keep the file, you can save it that way. But yeah, if you're saving it as a cloud doc, you can just, it auto saves through the whole presentation. And then I can save things and say, in a presentation, and I'll save that version of it forever. So I should probably also save pre-presentation. So now I've bookmarked two ends of it, and I can go back and forth to the versions. Okay.
Awesome. Cool. Going once, going twice. Some more questions. Other than that, happy prototyping, happy connecting noodles, happy adding AutoAnimate, happy noodling, noodle everywhere. Connect your noodles everywhere. I had a really long day, so just so you all know. Yeah, thank you so much. Type noodles in the chat if you're ready to add noodles. Noodles. All right, I will type that on Discord so we can all my homies love noodles. Yeah. What are all your favorite kind of noodles? Do you like udon, like the wide kind, or the thin kind, like ramen noodles or udon noodles? What kind of noodles are y'all feeling right now? Udon? Okay. What about you, Matt and Jack? What kind of noodles? Nice.
Fettuccine.
Ramen, nice.
Are you hungry right now, Grace?
Yeah, I had a really long day and yeah, I'm just thinking about it. That's why my brain's kind of like fried right now. So, but yeah, thank you all so much for coming. This was fun. Make sure to watch the recording. I'll post it right now. It's already in general chat, but I'll post it in the event recordings channel so you have access to it. Other than that, have a good evening or night or morning wherever you are in the world. And thank you all so much for coming, and catch Matt at office hours.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.